Welcome everyone. Hope you're having a great summer. It's been crazy hot here the last couple of weeks, so I'm in the garage early this morning trying to get this project done quickly, as all projects need to be when I'm working on my wife's car. Today I'll be replacing one of the famed failure items on the B8 platform, which is the power steering pressure hose. I'm also going to be talking about OE power steering fluid options for VAG cars and their missability. And of course, because we're cracking open the system, I'll have to fill and bleed the power steering fluid. So to be totally honest, this project snuck up on me. I've got the car up on stands here because I'm trying to chase down a front end rattle from the front driver's side here and I can't find it. But while I was checking things out, I noticed that there's this big wet spot on the rear half of the front set of belly pans. And when I go upstream to check where it came from, I found that the rusty X-brace is actually completely saturated with power steering fluid up on this front corner here, because directly above it, we've got our power steering pressure hose. And if I were to pull back this black sheathing here, you would see that it's leaking from the crimped fitting right there. Like I said, I wasn't anticipating the pressure hose being a problem at all, despite its bad reputation, because at 119,000 kilometers, which is only 40,000 kilometers ago for this car, the hose was replaced at the dealer. And looking at the service records, I can see that it was brought in citing the very typical shuddering at low speeds at full lock, which this car is not doing right now, by the way. So they replaced it, and they replaced it with the version DP, and I confirmed that by looking at the part. And the interesting part is DP is the newest revision, but you can tell that Audi has had a lot of problems with these because DP is the 4th revision, and that makes it the 5th total version of this part. So the fact that this OEM part failed again in such short order kind of has me tripping, because I checked it out and I could go buy another OE part for about $400 Canadian, but now I have zero confidence in the longevity of these things. So what's a guy to do when component reliability is a concern? Well, if you guys have ever heard of Speed Academy or watched Pete build his M5 conversion wagon, and by the way, if you haven't heard of their channel, go check them out. They're Speed Academy, and they're also Canadians. They're out in Ontario, and besides doing a bunch of really cool stuff, they suffer from the same rust problems that I do, so that makes me happy. But anyways, he went and bought a ton of OE quality parts from FCP Euro, who have an insanely good warranty. Literally stated on FCP's website, they offer a lifetime replacement guarantee, as long as you're the one that owns the car and purchased that part, on all their items they sell, including consumable items. Think about that. Any part that can break, naturally fail, or wear, like fluids, brake pads, filters, they'll replace it for free if you just ship it back to them. They have an FAQ section on their site that explains that, yes, this is real, and how and why it works. That made my decision pretty simple. So I'm going to use FCP Euro for all my future purchases where the item I'm buying is inherently at risk of damage or wear, or it's a high failure rate item. Because of this warranty, I jumped on the cheaper Rhein option. As it turns out though, this video may as well be called Fixing My Power Steering with CRP Automotive, because as I read more about the quality of Rhein products, I learned that they belong to a parent company that also owns Pentosin, a leading OE manufacturer for premium fluids including hydraulic fluid for power steering. And although I can't find verifiable proof of this on either Audi or Pentosin's websites, I think it's actually possible that Pentosin is the OE manufacturer for VW and Audi's power steering fluid, because they don't make their own power steering fluid. And I think this is actually in this bottle that you would go and buy at the dealer yourself. Look at that marketing. It's actually funny. So Rhein, and I'm still butchering that pronunciation, like I'm sure all of us in the North American market are.
Rhein.
It actually means pure in German. I'm sure a lot of us are saying something like rain or rain, but that's apparently not how it's said. All right, let's get to the work. So just to catch you up with what I've got going on, yes, the car is off the ground, and that's going to be useful later when we want to bleed the power steering system. And by the way, it is fairly level, which is important. Of course, I've got the wheel off. Front fender liner is out just because of the other work that I was doing, but that might be helpful to fish through the hose later. Belly pans, of course, are out, and the first thing we're going to want to do is get as much of the power steering fluid out of the system just to reduce the drain time, and you're going to lose it all anyways. So what I'm going to do is crack open the reservoir and use my Mighty Vac fluid extractor to suck out as much of it as I can. That netted me a little bit of fluid, but better than nothing. So let's move on to the hose, and note this little bracket right here. You can see we're looking towards the back of the car right now, that the pressure hose is actually held to the top of the X-brace by one little 10mm nut. A lucky guy would have already removed that nut, but for me, I'm already stricken by the Canadian rust I was talking about earlier. I can't get this one off. Normally you could throw a 16mm box wrench on the end of this black grommet right here and stop it from spinning, but I can't. Mine is spinning inside of the wrench and it's actually about to tear. So unfortunately that means I have to get destructive and creative here. So what I'm going to do is actually drop the entire X-brace with this still attached. Just know that these are 18 millimeter and there's 6 of them. So I did what I said. I loosened up the X-brace here quite a bit. That's actually helpful, knowing I was about to make a mess and that the fluid could decant basically down the suspension. Disconnecting it was good. Anyways, all you really have to do to loosen up the bottom of the power steering line is remove 2 of these M10 triple squares and just lightly pull the line out and all the fluid will drain out. So if you're following along, hopefully you've had better luck than I am, because at this point you have your X-brace removed, it's not connected to your power steering line at all, and those lower 2 bolts are out with the fluid drained, and now you're on the final step of just removing the last 2 bolts on the top of the power steering pump, and you can use a 5mm Allen key to do that. It's out. I've already started the autopsy, but before I finish that with you, I really underestimated the effort that it was going to take to get that hose out. There are a few more things you need to do, and I'm going to tell you right now. It's still absolutely true that there's only 5 things to remove to get the hose loose. That was 2 screws at the top, 2 screws at the bottom, and then since I have the pre-facelift, I have that 10mm nut at the top of the brace to take off, and that will make the hose loose, but it won't get it out because the main problem is it's going to be stuck under the motor mount on the driver's side, and you're going to have to remove a couple of things to give it the height to slip through the top end. The way that you create this size of gap to slip the top of the hose fitting through is to do 2 things. Subframe needs to go down and the motor mount and engine and its bracket need to go up. So step number 1 is support the weight of the engine. I just have my jack here and a block of wood under the oil pan to provide a little bit of stable support to go up. And then after that, I took out the 2 M8 head bolts that hold the motor mount bracket to the subframe. To finish fully detaching the engine and motor mount from the subframe, you also have to remove 2 of the 16mm bolts that hold it in place. And then to allow the subframe to now drop, I just loosened about 3/4 of the way the 2 big 18mm bolts that hold the subframe up to the frame itself. And the very last thing is this little metal loop that you will find attached to this stud right above the axle boot on the back side of the motor mount bracket. This little loop just holds up the power steering hose so it stays away from the axle. With all that stuff loose or removed, that's all you're going to need to take your jack and jack up the engine maybe an inch, and that's enough to slip through that fitting under the mount. Now keep in mind, if you want to do an absolute to-the-book perfect job here, you should be buying some new hardware because a lot of that stuff is torque to yield. The 6 bolts that hold up the X-brace, the 4 bolts that hold the motor mount bracket together, and the 2 bolts that I loosened for the subframe, all that stuff should be replaced. Since this item is such a high rate of failure item, I want to take a second and take a really good look at mine to pinpoint where it failed and give you a little bit of data to check out on your own car if you think something might be going on. So when I took this out, I was really careful not to get any fluid that might have spilled out of the pump or something else on this so it wouldn't screw up my evaluation. And I was really interested to find that once I cut open this top part of the sheathing here, it's soaked right from the bottom of this joiner fitting right here all the way to here. But I had no idea this was going on. And not coincidentally, I suspect, if we move down here to where I knew there was a problem, I thought it was coming out of right here at the bottom. Not true. Out of the identical fitting on the same bottom side, it's leaking. I don't know anything about hydraulic hoses, so I can't tell you why those fittings might be failing. But yeah, I've read online that you could take this to a shop that specializes in these hoses and they would check out the size and specs and the length and probably manufacture something that's stronger for you, cheaper than what it's going to cost for you to buy this hose. And that might be a good way to go. Honestly, if this thing fails so often, maybe that is a longer term solution. But if one of you watching this video know more about this, and now that you've seen the fittings that have failed for me and you want to pipe in with what you think's going on, by all means, throw something in the comments. Now you guys might need to help me figuring out the torque values here because this is how much of a rush this project was. I haven't gotten my Irwin subscription yet and downloaded all that information. But I'm going to go ahead and do a reverse installation really quick, hose first, then the hardware. And keep in mind that if you're not replacing your stretch bolts, just over torque them and put blue Loctite on there. So I'm doing the power steering fittings kind of Guten tight. They weren't on there too hard. This little nut though for sure is 9 Newton meters. The M8 bolts that hold the bottom of the motor mount bracket to the bottom of the subframe are 20 Newton meters. And then the 16 mils that go through the top of the subframe bracket into the top of the motor mount bracket are 55 Newton meters. And then I'm pretty sure that all the big 18s, the ones that are in the X-brace and then holding up the top of the subframe into the chassis, those should be 90 Newton meters plus 135 degrees of rotation. The last major activity to do here is to just refill and bleed the system. So I'm not equipped to do a power flush, but honestly, I don't really care if I get all the remaining fluid out, but I do want to get whatever else I can and clean up the reservoir and its filter inside. Speaking of which, I've collected some information from Pentosin's website to address the sometimes confusing topics of my cap says I need mineral oil and what fluid can I use or mix. In this table, I'm just assuming that Pentosin is in fact the OE manufacturer for Audi's hydraulic fluid and showing the attributes of their really two now, primary products. First off, mineral oil is now an out-of-date product to use in power steering systems. You can source it technically and you cannot mix it with a synthetic fluid, but there's no good reason, in my opinion, not to flush it and replace it with a more modern synthetic equivalent like CHF 11S. If you have an older car though and feel it's important to hold out on 7.1, that's fine. I recognize there's the school of thought out there that the components require mineral oil to function properly. Moving into the synthetic options, you've got 11S and 202. Each are miscible with one another and represent more modern Audi fluid choices based on the production date of the vehicles. People call them the GU 2000 and GU 4000, and interestingly, both the reservoir caps on my 06 S4 and this 09 A4 call for the 2000, despite their years. If you go to the dealership today and just ask for a bottle of power steering fluid, they're going to hand you one of these, 1 liter of the GU 4000. So based on that and the production dates of my cars, I'm just going to move to the Pentosin CHF 202 for all my future top-ups and replacements because I'm not going to have to worry about miscibility issues. So let me get to this final cleaning and then I'll meet you back for the bleed. Home stretch here. So what we're going to do to start the bleeding process is just gravity fill the reservoir with your power steering fluid and just bring it up to the level of at least minimum. Then what we're going to do is go in the car and start it for 2 seconds and then turn it off, and don't touch the steering wheel at all. You're not turning the wheels at this point. What we're trying to do is just get the pump moving and kick out some of the air that's going to be trapped in the lines for sure, and then go out and check the reservoir again and bring it back up to that minimum level. Wait 30 seconds at least before you start doing that again, but continually do that process until you finally hit a stable level in the reservoir. At that point, we're going to go and turn on the car's ignition and we're going to turn the wheels lock to lock 10 times. Turn it off again. Once again, go check the level in the reservoir. Do that process until you're at a stable point again. And then finally we can turn on the car, leave it running this time, and do another 10 lock to locks. Keep in mind that while you're doing this, you can leave the cap off, screwed on a little bit, but not entirely off, just in case something bubbles out of there, but you don't want the lid on there tight. All done. I just went for a test drive and everything feels really good. And I actually noticed 2 things. One was that the steering felt lighter, and I'm guessing that's because the old system had a leak and therefore wasn't building enough pressure to give me the full effect of steering assist. And now that it's nice and tight, I am feeling it. So that was awesome. And I also noticed that the car idled a little bit quieter. Maybe I was just making that up, but maybe again, because of that leak, the pump was working harder than it had to. And it was making a little bit more noise, but I swear that the idle was nice and smooth and quiet. So I'm really happy. All in all, that was more work than I thought it would be. I probably put, I don't know, 2 days into this. And if I did it again, I could probably do the whole job in maybe 4 or 5 hours. That's just me. So definitely take a run at it. It's not impossible by any means. And I hope that this video really helps you get through your own project. If you liked this video and found it helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really does mean a lot and it helps me out a ton. Thanks, see you next time.